"That flagpole," she said, her voice a low, gravelly thing that sounded like it was lubricated with sandpaper and cheap wine, "is a blight, a garish, unapproved, and, frankly, emotionally manipulative display of militaristic kitsch. It's coming down, Mr. Davies, and you're paying a $500 fine for erecting it without written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." She tapped a perfectly manicured blood-red nail on the laminated sheet attached to her clipboard, the plastic crinkling with sanctimonious authority. I looked from her smug, florid face, framed by a helmet of aggressively blonde hair, down to the piece of paper she was brandishing like a weapon. Karen Miller, president of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association, stood on my freshly cut lawn as if she owned it, her considerable frame clad in a powder blue tracksuit that strained at the seams. She was a monument to suburban entitlement, a petty tyrant ruling over a fiefdom of beige houses and manicured hedges. But the thing she was pointing at wasn't just a flagpole. It was a 20-foot brushed aluminum sentinel, and at its peak, illuminated by a dedicated solar-powered spotlight, was a crisply folded triangle of American flag under a plexiglass case. It was the burial flag of Sergeant Marcus Thorne, my best friend, who took a piece of shrapnel meant for me in a dusty corner of Kandahar. It wasn't a display, it was a memorial. My hand, which had been resting on the door frame, clenched into a fist so tight my knuckles went white. I could feel the familiar cold calm settle over me, the one that always came before the storm in the desert. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously even, "you are trespassing, and you are seconds away from saying something you will regret for a very, very long time. Get off my property." The shock of a direct order delivered without the usual deference she commanded made her recoil for a half-second. But her programming, the ingrained belief in her own absolute authority, quickly reasserted itself. She puffed out her chest, the gold-plated HOA president name tag glinting in the afternoon sun. "This is HOA common ground up to the sidewalk, Mr. Davies. I am well within my rights. And now you're being hostile. That's another fine. Section 12, Article C. Unneighborly conduct. That'll be another $250. She made a gleeful little note on her clipboard. $750, due in 7 days, or we place a lien on your house. That was it, the line. She had crossed it with jackboots and a marching band. The memorial to my friend, the sanctity of my home, the quiet life I had tried to build after trading my uniform for a county polo shirt. She had violated all of it with a clipboard and a smirk. This is the kind of neighborhood nightmare you only hear about until it lands on your doorstep wearing a pastel tracksuit. If you've ever had to deal with a power-tripping HOA board or a neighbor from hell, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now, where was I? Oh, right. Standing on my porch, watching this woman threaten to take my home over a tribute to a fallen hero. Before I moved into Northwood Estates, I'd spent 12 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I learned how to build bridges, and I learned how to blow them up. More importantly, I learned how to read regulations, how to document everything, and how to dismantle a hostile power structure from the inside out using its own rules against it. After my honorable discharge, I wanted peace. I wanted a lawn to mow and a quiet street where the loudest thing I heard was the ice cream truck. I took a job with the county. It was a good fit for my skills, methodical, detail-oriented, and strictly by the book. I became a registered environmental health specialist, a health inspector. My district, by a twist of fate I was only just beginning to appreciate, included the pristine, beige, and apparently tyrannical community of Northwood Estates. I bought this house 6 months ago with the money I'd saved in a VA loan. The first thing I did before I even unpacked my kitchen was install that memorial. It was a promise I'd made to Marcus's mother, that he wouldn't be forgotten. It was centered perfectly in a small garden of white stones and patriotically colored perennials. It violated no setback rules, obstructed no views, and was, by any sane person's definition, a tasteful and solemn tribute. But Karen Miller was not a sane person. She was a predator who smelled weakness, and she mistook my quiet nature for it. 7 days, Karen? I asked, my voice dropping lower. You're sure about that? She smiled, a thin, cruel slash of red lipstick. As sure as I am that your little shrine is coming down, she chirped, turning on her heel and marching back toward the sidewalk, her orthopedic sneakers squelching slightly in the damp grass. I watched her go, not with rage, but with a chilling sense of purpose. She had declared war. She just didn't realize she declared it on a man who had spent his entire adult life being trained to fight and win. She wanted to use rules and paperwork as a weapon. Fine. I was about to show her what a real expert could do with a clipboard. The battle for Northwood Estates had begun, and Karen Miller had just fired the first and last shot of her reign. The certified letter arrived 3 days later, a crisp white envelope that felt heavier than its contents. It was a formal declaration of hostilities. Inside, printed on thick, creamy letterhead embossed with the Northwood Estates HOA logo, was an itemized bill of grievances. The original $500 fine for the unapproved structure, flagpole, was there, along with the tacked-on $250 for hostile and unneighborly conduct. But Karen, in her infinite malevolence, had added more. There was a new $100 fine for non-compliant landscaping, use of non-native rock aggregate, referencing the white stones in the memorial garden. Another $150 for improper illumination, citing the solar spotlight. The total was now an even $1,000. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, filled with references to arcane bylaws and subsections, all designed to overwhelm and cow a resident into submission. It concluded with the same threat: pay within 7 days, or a lien would be filed. My wife, Sarah, a nurse with a heart of gold and the patience of a saint, read it over my shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. $1,000, Mark, this is insane. Can she do this? I laid the letter on our granite countertop and looked at her. She thinks she can, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. That's the fun part. That evening, after Sarah went to bed, I went to war. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat down at my dining room table, and opened the 3-inch binder I'd been given at closing. The Northwood Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. For the next 5 hours I read. I read every single word, every poorly written clause and contradictory article. I highlighted, I cross-referenced, I made notes in the margins. It was drier than Iraqi sand, but I treated it like an enemy operations manual, and just like any poorly written manual, it was full of holes. I discovered that the Architectural Review Committee she cited hadn't had a quorum for a meeting in over 2 years, rendering any of its theoretical decisions invalid. I found a clause that specifically allowed for reasonable patriotic displays, with no definition of what reasonable meant, a legal gray area big enough to drive a tank through. But the real prize, the silver bullet, was something I already knew about. I logged onto my computer and printed out a clean copy of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. It's a federal law that explicitly prohibits homeowners associations from preventing a resident from displaying the U.S. flag on their property. I then spent another hour drafting my official response. It was polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. I addressed each of her bogus fines one by one, citing the exact HOA bylaws she had violated in her procedure, or the federal law she was breaking. I pointed out the lack of a functioning ARC. I included a copy of the Federal Act. I concluded by stating that not only would I not be paying the fraudulent fines, but I was also formally demanding the immediate withdrawal of the violation notice and a written apology. Any further communication on this matter, I wrote, should be directed to my legal counsel, a man who, at that moment, did not exist. The next morning, I drove to the post office and sent the letter via certified mail, return receipt requested. The little green card would be my proof that she had received it. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a sniper shot. Now I would wait and see how she reacted. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I was walking my dog, a dopey golden retriever named Chester, when I saw Tom, my next-door neighbor. Tom was a retired Marine Master Sergeant, a guy who kept his lawn as neat as a drill pad and had a handshake that could crush walnuts. He waved me over. "Saw Karen leaving your porch the other day," he said, his voice a low rumble. Looked like she was on the warpath. I gave him the short version of the story. He just nodded, his face grim. "Sounds about right," he said. "She tried to find me last year because my trash can was visible from the street for 2 hours after the garbage truck came. 2 hours. Said it lowered property values." He shook his head in disgust. "Watch your back with her, Mark. She doesn't fight fair. When she can't win with the rules, she makes things personal. She tried the same with the Hendersons down the street. Got them on some zoning technicality with their kid's treehouse. Cost them thousands." I thanked him for the warning, but I already knew Karen wasn't going to take her defeat gracefully. A person like that can't stand being proven wrong, especially by one of her subjects. Her power was built on a foundation of fear and intimidation, and I had just shown her I wasn't scared. She would have to escalate. She would have to find another way to hurt me, to put me back in my place. I had no idea at the time that her next move would be so monumentally stupid, so perfectly, poetically idiotic. She was about to hand me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle her entire empire. She was going to try to get me in trouble at my own job. The email landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, flagged with a red exclamation point for high priority. The subject line was simple. New complaint assigned, case number 78-B41, Northwood Estates. My boss, Frank Miller, no relation to Karen, thank God, ran a tight ship at the county environmental health department. He was a stickler for procedure, a man who believed that the proper form, filled out in triplicate, was the foundation of civilization. I liked Frank. He was fair, and he trusted his people. I opened the email and downloaded the attached complaint form. I started reading, my eyes scanning the familiar fields. Date, time, complainant information. The complainant was listed as anonymous, with the contact line simply reading, "A concerned neighbor." My mouth tightened. I knew exactly which concerned neighbor this was. Then I got to the address of the alleged violations and I had to stop. I read it once, then twice. I leaned back in my squeaky office chair and a slow, cold grin spread across my face. The address listed was mine, 124 Willow Creek Lane. I scrolled down to the description of the alleged public health nuisances. It was a work of pure fiction, a paranoid fever dream of suburban decay. Overflowing garbage cans attracting vermin, Karen had written. Large amounts of stagnant water in the backyard creating a mosquito breeding ground. Possible rodent infestation evidenced by droppings on the driveway, unsanitary accumulation of debris and waste. It was a greatest hits collection of health code violations, each one a potential fine of several $100s from the county. It was a vicious, calculated attack designed to bring the full weight of a government agency down on my head. She wanted to humiliate me, to cost me money, and to potentially jeopardize my job by making me look like a hypocrite who couldn't even keep his own property up to code. It was a declaration of total war, and it was the single dumbest thing she could have possibly done. My phone rang. It was Frank. "Mark, you see that new one that just came in for your district?" he asked, his voice all business. "I did," I said, trying to keep the laughter out of my voice. "The one for 124 Willow Creek." "Yeah, that's the one. Looks like a real mess over there. Vermin, stagnant water, the whole 9 yards. I need you to get on that today. It's a priority." There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers on his desk. "Wait a second," he said, his voice changing. "Willow Creek. Isn't that—" "Yep," I said, leaning forward and putting my elbows on my desk. "That's my house, Frank." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his procedural, bureaucratic brain. A health inspector receiving an anonymous complaint about his own property, a complaint that would, by the rigid logic of our department's assignment system, require him to conduct an official inspection on himself. The situation was so absurd, so deliciously ironic, it bordered on the sublime. "Oh," Frank said finally. Then, after another long pause, he let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Oh, this is rich. Someone in your neighborhood must really have it in for you." "You have no idea, Frank," I said. "So, what's the procedure for this? I don't think it's in the manual." "No, it is definitely not," he chuckled. "All right, here's what we're going to do. We have to treat it as a legitimate complaint no matter how ridiculous it seems. You know the drill. You'll have to conduct a full site inspection. Document everything, photos, video, the works. Fill out the standard report. If there are no violations, you close the case. If, by some miracle, you actually do have a rat-infested swamp in your backyard, you'll have to cite yourself, and we'll assign a follow-up to another inspector." "So I'm going to inspect my own house," I clarified just to hear him say it. "You're going to inspect your own house," he confirmed. "And Mark, wear your body cam. I have a feeling this is one report I'm going to want to read very, very carefully." I hung up the phone, a feeling of pure, unadulterated glee washing over me. Karen Miller, in her desperate attempt to punish me, had just given me a gift. She thought she was dropping a bomb on me from on high. In reality, she had just handed me a government-issued warrant to meticulously and officially document every square inch of my property, creating an unassailable legal record of its condition. She wanted to play with the power of bureaucracy. I was the bureaucracy, and I was about to bring the full, pedantic, and utterly unforgiving weight of it down on her head. I grabbed my keys, my official clipboard, and my body camera. It was time to go conduct the most thorough and most satisfying health inspection of my entire career. I pulled my county-issued Ford Ranger into my own driveway, the official seal of the Department of Environmental Health gleaming on the driver's side door. I deliberately parked it so it was perfectly visible from Karen's living room window across the street. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to sit there and wonder what was happening, to feel that first little worm of doubt squirming in her gut. I clipped my body camera to the front of my official polo shirt and pressed the record button. A small red light began to blink, capturing everything in high-definition video and audio. "This is Inspector Mark Davies," I said, speaking clearly for the recording, "conducting a site inspection on Tuesday, August 15th at 14:30 hours. Case number 78-B41, location 124 Willow Creek Lane." I walked to the front of the property and began. I treated it with the solemn gravity of a crime scene investigation. I filmed the driveway, panning slowly across the clean, unstained concrete. Per the complaint, I narrated, allegation of rodent droppings on the driveway. A visual inspection of the entire concrete surface reveals no evidence of rodent activity, past or present. The surface is clean and free of debris. I moved to the side of the house where my garbage and recycling bins were stored. They were tucked neatly behind a small lattice fence, exactly as required by HOA rules, a fact I made sure to note. "Inspecting waste receptacles," I said, opening the lid of the garbage can. "Lid is secure and tight-fitting. Can is approximately 1/4 full, with all waste contained in sealed bags. No evidence of overflow, spillage, or pest access." I did the same for the recycling bin, documenting its equally pristine condition. Then I proceeded to the backyard. This was the site of the most egregious alleged violations: stagnant water and an accumulation of debris. My backyard was my sanctuary. A neat patio with a grill, a small vegetable garden, and a well-maintained lawn. I started with the garden. "Reviewing garden area," I intoned for the camera. "No evidence of unsanitary accumulation of debris. All plant matter is either living or has been properly composted in a sealed county-approved composting bin." I walked over to the compost bin and opened it, showing the camera the healthy, decomposing organic matter inside. Then I moved to the alleged large amounts of stagnant water. The only standing water on my entire property was in the bird bath, which I refreshed with clean water every single day. I filmed the bird bath, zooming in on the clear water. This is the only source of standing water on the premises. Water is clean, free of larvae, and maintained regularly. This does not constitute a mosquito breeding ground under County Code 34C. The whole process took nearly 45 minutes. I was meticulous. I filmed under the deck, inside the empty shed, along the entire fence line. I created an official, time-stamped, government-documented record that my property was not just compliant, but exemplary. It was an airtight alibi forged in the very fires of the bureaucracy Karen had tried to use against me. When I was finished, I stood in my driveway, made a final concluding statement for the camera, and turned it off. As I was putting my gear back in the truck, Tom the Marine wandered over from his yard, a curious look on his face. "Everything all right, Mark?" Saw the county truck and got worried. I explained the situation, the anonymous complaint, the self-inspection. Tom listened, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief and finally to a slow, appreciative grin. "She really did that?" he asked, shaking his head. "She called the county on the county inspector?" "She did," I confirmed. "That woman," Tom said, a note of awe in his voice, "has a tactical awareness I haven't seen since a second lieutenant tried to navigate with a tourist map of Paris." He grew serious again. "You know, she's pulled this anonymous complaint stunt before. The Hendersons with the treehouse? The first complaint to the city wasn't from the HOA. It was an anonymous tip to code enforcement. Same with the Garcias when they painted their trim a shade of beige she didn't like. She uses city and county agencies as her own personal goon squad." An idea began to form in my mind. A pattern. "How many others, Tom?" I asked. "How many people in this neighborhood has she targeted?" Tom's eyes narrowed. "More than you'd think. Most people just pay the fines to make her go away. It's easier than fighting. She bankrupted the Millers with legal fees over the placement of their satellite dish. Old man Hemlock had to tear out a wheelchair ramp he'd built for his wife because it wasn't pre-approved. This was bigger than a flagpole. It was a pattern of harassment and abuse of power. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a predator, using the HOA's authority to extort and bully her neighbors. Back at my office, I wrote up my inspection report. It was a thing of beauty, a monument to procedural perfection. I attached digital copies of the photos and the full unedited body camera footage. I detailed every false allegation from the complaint and systematically refuted it with documented evidence. I concluded my report with a single, carefully worded sentence. No violations were found. All allegations in the complaint are unsubstantiated. Recommend closing case file number 78-B41. Note: the nature of these demonstrably false allegations may suggest a pattern of malicious reporting. I emailed the completed report to Frank. He called me less than 5 minutes later. "I just watched the whole video," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The narration was a nice touch, very professional. I've never seen a cleaner birdbath in my life." "I do my best," I said dryly. "I'm closing the case," he said, "and I'm flagging the source address, assuming it came from your blonde neighbor across the street in our system. Any future anonymous complaints originating from there are going to get a little extra scrutiny." My own case was closed, but my investigation was just beginning. I had the official report clearing my name. Now it was time to gather the evidence I needed to hold Karen accountable for her reign of terror. I pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote 2 words: Operation Overlord. It was time to start documenting Karen Miller's own violations. My counteroffensive began not with a bang, but with a quiet, methodical reconnaissance. For the next week, I became a student of Northwood Estates, not as a resident, but as a health inspector. I took my dog Chester on extra long walks at different times of day, my eyes scanning, observing, and documenting. Karen, in her obsessive focus on the minor cosmetic details of her neighbors' properties, had grown sloppy. She had become blind to the real, substantive issues, the actual health and safety concerns that were festering right under her nose, many of them on property she was directly responsible for. The first and most obvious target was the community pool. It was late August, and the pool was still a hub of activity, but something was off. From the public sidewalk outside the chain-link fence, I could see the water had a distinct greenish, cloudy tint. Kids were splashing and yelling oblivious, but my trained eye saw a potential breeding ground for bacteria. One evening, armed with a sterile sample bottle from my work kit, I took a walk past the pool. Under the guise of tying my shoe near the fence, I reached through and discreetly collected a water sample from the shallow end. Back at the county lab the next day, the results were exactly what I expected, and worse. The chlorine levels were dangerously low, and the sample tested positive for coliform bacteria, including E. coli. It was a serious public health violation. The HOA was legally required to maintain proper sanitation, and they were failing spectacularly. Next on my list was the community playground. It was a sad, neglected little area with a swing set, a slide, and a sandbox. Karen's welcome letter had boasted about these family-friendly amenities. From the street, I used my phone's camera, zooming in on the base of the metal slide. I could clearly see significant patches of rust, some with sharp, flaking edges. The sandbox was even worse. Its wooden frame was rotting, and I could see several cats using it as a litter box. There was no cover, a direct violation of County Health Code, Section 52G, regarding public play areas. Then there was Karen's own house. Her property was a testament to her hypocrisy. While she was busy measuring the height of her neighbor's grass with a ruler, the drainage ditch that ran along the back of her property line was completely clogged with leaves, branches, and plastic debris. After a light rain, I walked the public access easement behind her house and saw exactly what I was looking for: a long, stagnant pool of murky water, shimmering with the iridescent bodies of mosquito larvae. It was a mosquito factory, a far more significant health hazard than my pristine bird bath could ever be. I documented everything. I took dozens of high-resolution, time-stamped photos from public property. I wrote detailed notes, citing the specific county health codes being violated. I cross-referenced the pool's maintenance logs, which were publicly posted, and noted the last recorded chemical check was over 2 weeks ago. I was building a case, brick by meticulous brick. This wasn't about retaliation, I told myself. It was about public safety. It was about enforcing the same rules Karen weaponized against others. It was about holding power accountable. But deep down, I knew there was a quiet, satisfying pleasure in it. The irony was just too delicious. She had tried to get me fired for a list of imaginary violations, and in doing so, she had directed my professional attention to her own very real and very serious negligence. My file on the Northwood Estates HOA grew thick. I had the pool water analysis report, photos of the rusty playground equipment, documentation of the mosquito breeding ground behind Karen's house, and a growing list of other minor infractions I'd spotted around the common areas: cracked sidewalks creating trip hazards, overflowing community trash receptacles, a broken security light at the neighborhood entrance. While I was gathering my data, I also started talking to more neighbors. My conversation with Tom had been an eye-opener. I made a point of being more visible, working in my front yard, waving to people. One by one, they started to open up. I met the Hendersons, a young couple who showed me the stack of legal bills from their fight with Karen over their son's treehouse. They'd eventually won, but it had cost them nearly $10,000. I spoke with old Mr. Hemlock, who had to remove his wife's wheelchair ramp. He told me with tears in his eyes that his wife had fallen twice on the garage steps since it was gone. The stories were all the same: a minor, insignificant issue blown into a major conflict by Karen's vindictive and arbitrary enforcement of the rules. She was a bully who picked her targets carefully, usually people she thought wouldn't or couldn't fight back. I took notes on every conversation. I asked if they would be willing to sign a formal affidavit if it came to that. To my surprise, most of them, emboldened by the fact that someone was finally listening, said yes. My personal battle was transforming into a community-wide insurrection. By the end of the week, I had a dossier on Karen and the HOA that was nearly an inch thick. It was a methodical, evidence-based indictment of her failed leadership. I had her on water safety violations, child safety hazards, public nuisance codes, and a clear pattern of targeted harassment. It was time to stop gathering intelligence and to launch the main assault. On Friday afternoon, I sat down at my desk at the county office. I filled out a fresh set of official complaint forms. This time, I wasn't the subject, I was the complainant. I filed 3 separate detailed complaints. One for the community pool, one for the playground and common areas, and one for the drainage ditch on Karen Miller's private property. I signed my own name at the bottom of each one. I was no longer an anonymous victim. I was a citizen and a county official demanding action. I submitted the forms electronically and then walked them over to Frank's office. He read them in silence, his expression growing more and more grim. When he finished, he looked up at me over his reading glasses. "This is extensive, Mark." "It's all documented, Frank. Photos, water samples, code citations. It's a mess out there." He nodded slowly, tapping the stack of papers on his desk. "She picked a fight with the wrong guy," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "All right. To avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, I'm assigning this to Dave. You can accompany him as the complainant and initial observer, but he'll be the lead inspector. Be ready. We're going out Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp." The trap was set. The official machinery of the county government was now aimed directly at Karen Miller, and I was going to be there to watch it go off. Monday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of beautiful sunny day that was about to become Karen Miller's personal hell. At precisely 8:55 a.m., 2 official county environmental health vehicles pulled up to the curb in front of my house. I was already waiting, dressed in my own uniform polo, holding a copy of my complaint file. Dave Fletcher, the inspector assigned by Frank, stepped out of the lead truck. Dave was a big, cheerful guy with a walrus mustache and an encyclopedic knowledge of the county health code. He was unflappable and strictly by the book, which made him the perfect person for the job. "Morning, Mark," he boomed, shaking my hand. "Frank said you had a little situation out here." "You could say that, Dave," I replied, handing him the file. "It's all in there." He spent a few minutes reviewing my documentation, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page he turned. "Good grief," he muttered, looking at the pool water analysis. "This is textbook. Okay, let's do this. Protocol says we start by attempting to contact the responsible party. In this case, the HOA president. You know where she lives?" A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. "Oh, I do. Right across the street." We walked. 2 uniformed county officials with clipboards and official-looking equipment directly across the street and up Karen Miller's pristine concrete walkway. I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on us. Curtains twitched. A few people who were out walking their dogs or getting their mail suddenly stopped, frozen in place, sensing that something significant was about to happen. I had the distinct pleasure of ringing her doorbell. We waited. After a moment, the door opened a crack and Karen's suspicious face appeared. Her eyes, small and hard, flickered from me to Dave, to the county trucks parked at the curb. The smug confidence she'd worn like a suit of armor during our last encounter was gone, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice tight, "what is the meaning of this? Are you harassing me?" "Ma'am," Dave said, stepping forward and flashing his credentials. "My name is Dave Fletcher. I'm an inspector with the County Environmental Health Department. Are you Karen Miller, president of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association?" Her eyes narrowed. "I am. What is this about?" "We're here to conduct a series of inspections based on several formal complaints we've received," Dave said, his tone perfectly neutral and professional. He didn't mention who filed them. He didn't have to. She looked at me, her face a mask of dawning fury. "You," she hissed, "this is retaliation. This is an abuse of your position. I'm going to have your job for this." "Ma'am," Dave cut in, his voice firm now. "Mr. Davies is here as the initial complainant, which is his right as a citizen. I am the lead inspector on this case. Right now, we need you to grant us access to the community pool area for an inspection. If you refuse, we will be forced to get a warrant from a judge, and the facility will be closed pending that inspection." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Closing the pool in late August would be a cardinal sin in this neighborhood. Karen was trapped. Her face cycled through a series of emotions: outrage, disbelief, and finally a sort of sputtering, impotent rage. She knew she had no choice. "Fine," she spat, grabbing a key ring from a hook by the door. She slammed the door behind her and stomped down the walkway toward the pool, with Dave and me following a few paces behind. The inspection was a public spectacle. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the drama unfold. Tom was there, leaning against his mailbox with his arms crossed, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. At the pool, Dave was all business. He conducted his own water tests, his chemical kit spread out on the concrete. The results were immediate and damning. "Chlorine is basically zero," he announced loudly enough for the gathered neighbors to hear, "and the pH is way off. This water is unsafe for human contact." He walked over to the gate, pulled out a large laminated sign that read "Closed by order of the County Health Department," and fastened it to the gate with a heavy-duty zip tie. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Karen looked like she had been struck by lightning. Dave wasn't done. We moved to the playground. He ran a gloved hand over the rusted slide, shaking his head. He pointed out the rotting wood and the filth in the sandbox. "This entire area is a safety hazard," he declared, wrapping the whole structure in bright yellow "Do Not Use" tape. From there, we went to the back of Karen's property. She refused to let us in her yard, so Dave and I walked the public easement. He took one look at the festering, mosquito-infested ditch and started writing. "This is a clear violation of public nuisance codes, ma'am," he called over the fence to her. "You'll be receiving a formal notice to abate." By the time we were finished, Dave had a clipboard full of violations. He issued Karen a preliminary field report listing a dozen separate infractions. The official citations, he informed her, would be sent by certified mail to the HOA and to her personally, and would carry significant daily fines until they were rectified. Karen stood there, speechless, clutching the report in her hand. Her face was pale, her helmet of hair slightly askew. The entire neighborhood had just witnessed her being publicly and officially exposed as a negligent, hypocritical fraud. Her authority, built on a foundation of petty rules and intimidation, had crumbled to dust in less than an hour, all under the bright morning sun. As Dave and I walked back to our trucks, Tom came over to meet us. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grin wide. "That," he said, "was better than watching the 4th of July fireworks." I looked across the street. Karen was still standing there, frozen, as her neighbors, the people she had terrorized for years, stood watching her, no longer with fear, but with something new in their eyes: contempt. The spell was broken, and the revolution had just begun. The public shaming of Karen Miller acted like a dam breaking. For years, the residents of Northwood Estates had lived under a quiet blanket of fear, each family isolated in their own private battles against the HOA president. They paid the ridiculous fines, took down their basketball hoops, and repainted their mailboxes, all because it was easier to comply than to fight the seemingly unstoppable force of Karen and her clipboard. But seeing her publicly cited by the county, seeing the pool closed and the playground condemned due to her own negligence, changed everything. It proved she was not invincible. It proved she was accountable to a higher authority. And it proved that one person armed with the facts could successfully fight back. That evening, my phone started ringing. It was Tom first. "My phone's been blowing up," he said, excitement in his voice. "The Hendersons, the Garcias, Old Man Hemlocks, everyone's talking. They want to do something. They want to know what's next." "Tell them to meet at your house tomorrow night," I said without hesitation. 7 o'clock. It's time we get organized. The next evening, Tom's living room was packed. There were at least 15 families crammed onto his couches and folding chairs. The energy in the room was a potent mix of anger, relief, and nervous excitement. For the first time, they weren't alone. I stood before them, not as a county official, but as their neighbor. I laid out the facts, starting with Karen's bogus fines against my flagpole memorial. I told them about her malicious and false report to the health department. Then I detailed the results of my own investigation. The contaminated pool, the dangerous playground, the pattern of neglect. As I spoke, heads around the room nodded. Murmurs of "she did the same to me and I remember that" rippled through the crowd. After I finished, others began to speak. A woman named Maria Garcia tearfully recounted how Karen had forced them to repaint their front door 3 times, costing them over $1,000 because she couldn't find the exact shade of beige listed in the bylaws. A young father, Mr. Henderson, angrily described the legal threats and harassment over his son's treehouse. Mr. Hemlock, his voice trembling with emotion, told the story of his wife's wheelchair ramp. Each story added another layer to the indictment, painting a clear picture of a tyrant who used her position to bully, intimidate, and extort her neighbors for years. "She's not just a bad president," Tom said, his voice cutting through the emotional din. "She's a liability. My sister-in-law is an insurance agent. She said if a kid gets hurt on that rusty slide or gets sick from that pool, the HOA's insurance could refuse to cover it because of this documented negligence. We could all be on the hook for millions in a lawsuit." That got everyone's attention. This wasn't just about unfair fines anymore. It was about their financial security, the value of their homes. "So what do we do?" Maria Garcia asked, speaking for everyone in the room. "We can't just vote her out at the next annual meeting. That's 6 months away. She could do a lot more damage by then." This was the moment I had been waiting for. "We don't wait," I said, my voice firm. "We launch a multi-front attack. We use the bylaws against her just like she used them against us." I laid out my plan. First, we would form an official Concerned Citizens of Northwood Estates Committee. Second, we would pool our resources and hire a lawyer who specialized in HOA law. I'd already done the research and had a name. A sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Ben Carter who had a reputation for dismantling corrupt HOA boards. Third, we would use the HOA's own bylaws, which allowed for the calling of a special meeting if petitioned by 25% of the homeowners to force a public referendum and a vote of no confidence. Fourth, and most importantly, we would demand a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the last 5 years of Karen's presidency. "Where's all this money from the fines going?" I asked the room. "Is it being used for pool maintenance, for playground repairs, or is it funding something else?" The implication hung heavy in the air. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan, a purpose, and a war chest. We passed around a hat, and within minutes, we had collected over $5,000 as a retainer for the lawyer. A sign-up sheet to petition for the special meeting was filled in less than 10 minutes. We had more than enough signatures. The next morning, I called Ben Carter. I explained the situation, and he listened patiently. When I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Davies," he said finally, his voice laced with what sounded like professional glee, "you have already done 90% of my job for me. The health code violations, the signed affidavits from other homeowners, the public record of her negligence. This is an open and shut case of gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. When can you get me the paperwork?" I met with Ben that afternoon. I handed him my entire file, a copy of my self-inspection report, the official county violation notices issued by Dave, and the dozen signed affidavits I had collected from my neighbors. He looked through it all, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is beautiful," he said, tapping the stack of papers. "This is a legal kill shot. We'll have her out of office and facing potential civil and criminal liability before she knows what hit her." He explained the process. He would draft the formal petition for the special meeting and the demand for the forensic audit. He would also send a cease and desist letter to Karen personally, warning her against any form of retaliation against the members of our committee. The gears of justice were turning, powered by the collective will of a community that had finally had enough. Karen had built her empire on the principle of divide and conquer. She had kept her neighbors isolated and afraid, but by targeting me, she had inadvertently created a leader, a rallying point for all the people she had wronged. She had forged the very alliance that was now poised to destroy her. Ben Carter moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of a shark that smelled blood in the water. Within 48 hours, the first wave of the legal assault hit Northwood Estates. A process server, a grim-looking man in a cheap suit, delivered a thick manila envelope to Karen's front door. I watched from my window as she accepted it, her expression turning from confusion to pure, unadulterated fury as she read the contents. The package contained several documents, each one a carefully crafted legal torpedo aimed at the hull of her sinking ship. The first was the formal petition, signed by nearly 40% of the homeowners, demanding a special meeting of the association for the express purpose of holding a vote of no confidence in her presidency. The bylaws required the board to schedule this meeting within 30 days. The second document was a legal demand for a full, independent forensic audit of all HOA financial records, bank statements, and contracts for the past 5 years to be conducted by an accounting firm chosen by our committee. The third was a cease and desist letter personally addressed to Karen Miller, ordering her to halt all harassment and selective enforcement against the homeowners listed in the petition. It warned her that any further retaliatory action would be met with a lawsuit for which she could be held personally liable, piercing the corporate veil of the HOA. The final document was perhaps the most devastating. It was a notice from the HOA's own insurance carrier. Ben had, as a professional courtesy, forwarded them a copy of the county health code violations. The letter informed the HOA board that due to documented gross negligence in maintaining common areas, their liability coverage was under review and would likely be canceled unless immediate costly remediation was undertaken. In a single afternoon, Karen's world had been turned upside down. Her authority was challenged, her finances were under scrutiny, and the insurance that protected her and the board from lawsuits was about to be yanked away. The fallout was immediate. The county fines for the health code violations arrived via certified mail addressed to the HOA. The daily penalties were staggering. The cost to drain, clean, and properly refill the pool was in the tens of thousands. The playground had to be demolished and replaced. The drainage issues required extensive landscaping work. The HOA's reserve funds, which were supposed to be healthy, were suddenly facing a catastrophic drain. Karen tried to rally her board, a small group of hand-picked sycophants who had enjoyed the minor perks of power under her reign, but her magic was gone. They were terrified. They were looking at the insurance letter and the lawyer's demands and realizing that their own personal assets could be at risk. One of them, a timid man named George who served as the treasurer, secretly called Tom. He was in a panic. "She's been paying her cousin's landscaping company triple the going rate for years," George whispered into the phone. "The contract for the pool maintenance went to a friend of hers who I don't think ever even showed up. The books are a mess. I tried to ask questions once, and she threatened to fine me into oblivion over the color of my window shutters." The trap we had set was working perfectly. Her own system was eating her alive. The other board members, smelling blood in the water and desperate to save themselves, started to distance themselves from her. They forced her to schedule the special meeting, setting a date for 2 weeks out. The notices were posted on the community bulletin board and sent out via email. The agenda was simple and brutal. Item 1. Vote of no confidence in HOA President Karen Miller. Item 2. Vote to authorize a full forensic audit of HOA finances. Karen was cornered, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight. In the days leading up to the meeting, she tried to wage a counterinsurgency. She distributed flyers filled with lies, accusing me of being a disgruntled employee on a personal vendetta, of trying to destroy the neighborhood for my own selfish reasons. She claimed the audit was a waste of money and that the violations were minor issues I had exaggerated, but it was too late. Nobody was listening to her anymore. They had seen the closed pool with their own eyes. They had seen the yellow tape on the playground. They had heard the stories from their neighbors. Her credibility was shot. The night before the meeting, our committee met one last time at Tom's house. Ben Carter was there to walk us through the strategy. "She's going to be loud and she's going to be vicious," he warned us. "She will try to make it personal. Do not take the bait. Stick to the facts. We have the evidence, we have the bylaws, and we have the votes. This is a simple procedural matter. We are a group of homeowners exercising our right to hold our elected leadership accountable. I was slated to speak first to present the timeline of events and the evidence from the health department. Tom would speak next, representing the voices of the harassed neighbors. Then Ben would handle the legal and financial arguments for the audit. We were prepared. We were united. And we were ready to dismantle Karen Miller's reign of terror once and for all in the very public forum she had once commanded with absolute power. The final confrontation was at hand. The community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that had served as Karen's throne room for years, was packed to the gills. Every seat was taken, and people were standing 3 deep along the back wall. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable electric tension that felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I had never seen more than a dozen people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there were over 100. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long table with the other 4 board members. She was dressed in a severe navy blue blazer, a pathetic attempt to project an image of authority, but her face was pale and drawn, her usual smugness replaced by a brittle, defensive glare. The other board members looked like they were facing a firing squad, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The meeting was called to order. The first agenda item was announced: a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president, Karen Miller. According to the bylaws, both sides were allowed 10 minutes to present their case. I was the first to the podium. I placed my file on the lectern and looked out at the faces of my neighbors. "My name is Mark Davies," I began, my voice calm and steady, amplified by the small microphone. "And like many of you, I moved to Northwood Estates for a quiet, peaceful life. But in the last month, my family has been subjected to a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and fraudulent fines by our HOA president, all because I chose to display a memorial to a fallen soldier on my property." I walked them through the entire story, from the initial confrontation to the $1,000 fine. I held up a copy of the certified letter she had sent me. Then I told them about the anonymous complaint she had filed against me with the county. "This wasn't just an attack on me," I said, my voice rising with controlled passion. "It was an attempt to corruptly use a public agency as a weapon for a personal vendetta. But it backfired. Because as a health inspector, it became my duty to investigate, and what I found was a pattern of gross negligence that has endangered our children and put this entire community at financial risk." I presented the evidence. I used a projector to show them the pictures of the green pool water, the rusty slide, the mosquito-infested ditch behind Karen's own house. I showed them a copy of the official county report, with the long list of violations and the close-by order of the health department notice. The images were damning and undeniable. "This is not about a flagpole," I concluded, looking directly at Karen. "This is about a fundamental breach of trust. It's about a leader who is more interested in persecuting her neighbors over the color of their mailboxes than protecting our children from E. coli. It is about accountability. And it is time for a change." I returned to my seat amidst a wave of stunned silence, followed by a ripple of applause. Tom spoke next, his powerful Master Sergeant's voice filling the room. He didn't use a projector, he just spoke from the heart, telling the stories of the Hendersons, the Garcias, and Mr. Hemlock. He gave voice to the years of quiet frustration and abuse that so many in the room had endured. Then it was Karen's turn. She strode to the podium, her face a thunderous mask of rage. She didn't try to refute the evidence. She attacked. "This is a witch hunt!" She shrieked into the microphone, her voice shrill and cracking, led by a disgruntled man who couldn't handle being told to follow the rules like everyone else. He used his government position to target me, to fabricate these so-called violations. This is a coup, an illegal takeover by a small group of troublemakers who want to destroy the high standards that keep our property values up. She ranted and raved, calling us liars, socialists, and worse. She threatened lawsuits and dire consequences, but her words were hollow. The fear was gone. The people in the room weren't her subjects anymore. They were her jury, and they had already reached a verdict. When her 10 minutes were up, she stood there, panting, her face flushed. The room was silent. No one clapped, no one spoke. They just stared. The vote was a formality. It was conducted by a show of hands. When the acting secretary asked for all those in favor of the motion of no confidence, a forest of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. When he asked for those opposed, only 2 hands were raised, Karen's and that of her one remaining loyal board member. A motion was made from the floor to appoint Tom as the interim president, which passed with a roar of approval. Karen Miller, who had walked into the room as a queen, was now just a disgraced homeowner. But we weren't done. The second agenda item was the forensic audit. Ben Carter stepped up to the podium and calmly, coolly laid out the legal and financial necessity of discovering where years of HOA dues and fine revenues had actually gone. He explained that without a clean bill of financial health, the HOA would be unable to secure new liability insurance, leaving every homeowner exposed. Karen, now stripped of her title, stood up from the audience and screamed, "This is a waste of your money. The books are fine. I won't allow it." Tom, now speaking with the authority of his new position, banged the gavel. "You are out of order, Karen, and you are no longer in a position to allow anything. We're having the vote." The motion to authorize the audit passed just as overwhelmingly. The meeting was adjourned. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her empire in ruins around her, before she turned and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. A spontaneous cheer erupted in the room. People were shaking hands, hugging, and clapping each other on the back. It was a moment of pure, cathartic victory. The tyrant had been deposed. The revolution was successful. Now all that was left was to see what secrets the audit would uncover. The aftermath of the town hall meeting was like the sun breaking through after a long and oppressive storm. A sense of relief and optimism swept through Northwood Estates. The new interim board, led by Tom, immediately got to work. They hired a reputable pool company to perform an emergency deep cleaning and chemical rebalancing. They had the hazardous playground equipment professionally demolished and began taking bids for a new, modern structure. They brought in a landscaping crew to clear the clogged drainage ditches throughout the common areas. For the first time in years, the HOA was functioning as it was supposed to, as a service organization working to improve the community, not as a punitive body terrorizing it. Meanwhile, the forensic accountants, a team of sharp-eyed professionals from a firm Ben Carter recommended, descended on the HOA's financial records. They took possession of years' worth of bank statements, invoices, contracts, and meeting minutes. What they uncovered was worse than any of us had imagined. Karen's reign hadn't just been incompetent, it had been criminally corrupt. The audit revealed a systematic pattern of embezzlement and fraud. The landscaping company run by her cousin had overbilled the HOA by more than $60,000 over 3 years for work that was either substandard or never performed at all. The pool maintenance contract with her friend was a complete sham. He was paid $10,000 a year and did nothing, which explained the E. coli. There was a secret credit card in the HOA's name, but controlled exclusively by Karen, with thousands of dollars in charges for personal expenses. Lavish dinners, spa treatments, online shopping sprees. She had been using the residents' dues and the money from her punitive fines as her own personal slush fund. The total amount of misappropriated funds was well over $100,000. The auditors prepared a detailed, ironclad report, complete with copies of falsified invoices and incriminating financial statements. Ben Carter reviewed it and immediately scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office. "This goes beyond a civil matter now," he told me, his voice grim. "This is felony, grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement." The case was presented to the DA, who, armed with the mountain of evidence we had provided, moved swiftly. A grand jury was convened, and an indictment was handed down. 2 months after that fateful town hall meeting, I was in my front yard, watering the perennials around Marcus's memorial, when 2 unmarked police cars pulled up in front of Karen Miller's house. 2 plainclothes detectives got out, walked up her pristine walkway, and knocked on the door. When she answered, they presented her with a warrant for her arrest. They cuffed her on her own front porch, the morning sun glinting off the cold, hard steel. She didn't shriek or rage this time. She just looked small and defeated and old. As they led her to one of the cars, her eyes met mine across the street. There was no hatred in her gaze, just a kind of hollow emptiness. She had built a kingdom of fear on a foundation of lies, and now it had all come crashing down, burying her in the rubble. I didn't feel triumph or glee or even satisfaction. I just felt a quiet sense of justice, of order being restored. The news of her arrest spread through the neighborhood, not with celebration, but with a somber sense of closure. Her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily petty power can corrupt, and how vital it is for a community to stand together against it. In the months that followed, Northwood Estates began to heal. The new board, with Tom at the helm, operated with transparency and fairness. The pool reopened, cleaner and safer than ever. A beautiful new playground was installed, and the laughter of children replaced the silence of neglect. The HOA dues were actually lowered, as the new board eliminated the wasteful and fraudulent contracts. My flagpole memorial still stands, the spotlight clicking on every evening at dusk to illuminate the flag that honors my friend. It's no longer a point of contention. It's just a part of the neighborhood, a quiet symbol of a battle that was fought and won. Sometimes Tom will come over in the evening, and we'll sit on my porch with a couple of beers watching the kids play in the street and the sun set over the peaceful beige houses. "You know," he said to me one night, gesturing with his bottle toward the street, "it's funny. She was so obsessed with property values, but the best thing that ever happened to the value of this neighborhood was getting rid of her." I couldn't help but agree. We had fought for a flagpole, but we had won back a community. And that was a victory worth fighting for. Justice, like a well-maintained garden, requires constant vigilance, but the peace it brings is worth every ounce of effort.